Today we will be looking at the biological basis of psoriasis. Here is some general background on psoriasis. So it is a chronic skin disease. It is caused by an overactive immune system. The different forms are plaque, guttate, inverse, pustular, and erythrodermic. Ultimately, it is a buildup of skin cells, which leads to itchiness and irritation of the skin. In the picture, you can kind of see the buildup of skin and how it would be irritating. Okay, so moving on to the biological background of psoriasis. Since this is an overactive immune system disease, this leads to the inflammation on the skin. So when this happens, an antigen, which is an unwanted virus or bacteria, is mistakenly recognized by a T cell, and the T cell begins the inflammatory attack. This attack is carried out by the cytokines that send more immune cells to the infected area. The buildup of skin cells in the area is why the inflammation occurs and why you see the patchy skin. So in the picture, it's a more detailed representation of what goes on, but you can see the kind of the weird cells towards the top right corner. They're labeled the cytokine activated keratinocyte. So these are the different cells that are being sent into the thought to be infected area. But generally this is the process that is undergone when people have psoriasis. So moving on to the different kinds of psoriasis, the first one is plaque psoriasis. This is the most common form. As you can see in the picture, it forms red skin lesions and silvery scales, and this is itchy and painful. The next kind is guttate psoriasis. This tends to affect children and young adults. It can be triggered by an infection. The sores tend to be located on the scalp, torso, arms, legs, and back. The scales in this case are finer than other types of psoriasis, so they're smaller. Next is inverse psoriasis. So this form tends to affect areas with skin folds. So examples are under armpits, under breasts, around the belly button, even in the picture shown, it's around the folds in the elbow. So essentially anywhere there's folds. This can be triggered and or made worse by fungal infections and sweating. We also have the form of pustular psoriasis. This is rare. It starts off as red, tender skin and then leads into pus-filled blisters. This can be triggered by infections, irritation, or even medicine use. In some cases, this may require immediate medical care and or hospitalization. Lastly, we have erythrodermic psoriasis. This is the rarest and most severe form. It affects the whole body or large portions of the body. It includes red, peeling skin, itchiness, and a burning sensation. This can be triggered by some medicines, phototherapy, and sunburns. In this case, it has a possibility of being life-threatening. Now we have the effects of psoriasis on the individual, mainly their well-being. A survey conducted by NPF looked at 4,725 psoriasis sufferers, and they found that more than 70% of respondents reported feeling self-conscious about their psoriasis. 41% of those 4,000 some dressed to cover lesions. 56% said that the disease influences their capacity to enjoy life. 63% said that psoriasis influenced their emotional well-being. Psoriasis has effects on the individual and society on an economic level. So according to the National Psoriasis Foundation, a person may spend as much as $25,796 annually on psoriasis-related expenses. This equates to $135 billion for everyone with psoriasis in the US. When broken down further, the direct cost is roughly $8,000 annually per person. The indirect cost is roughly $4,000 annually per person. And then intangible costs is around $11,498 over an entire lifetime. Okay, so the general overview of psoriasis in society is anyone can get psoriasis. It tends to first appear between the ages of 15 and 35, although people younger than that or older than that can experience their first appearance of it. Males and females tend to get it at the same rate, although there have been cases where males have a higher rate of psoriasis in some areas, but tend to be pretty close in range. Also, psoriasis is not influenced by ethnic origin, so different races and cultures, and there's cases of psoriasis in every country. So here's a chart that looks at the prevalence and distribution of psoriasis in different genders and age groups. So as you can see, as somebody gets older, they're more likely to have psoriasis, and this is because it is a chronic disease, but it's not something that people tend to die from. So people who were diagnosed in the age category of 5 to 14 are still going to have it when they're in the 70 plus age group. And so the genders also tend to be relatively stable in their age ranges, and so that goes back with the other data where age and gender don't really have an influence on people who are getting the disease. Here is another chart that looks at the prevalence of psoriasis based on sex and country. And so like before, the sex doesn't really have an influence over who's getting psoriasis. It tends to be relatively equal in countries, although in some you see a small margin where male psoriasis is more common than female psoriasis. But ultimately it's relatively close. For example, in the United States, between 2003 and 2004, the male had 1.55%, female had 1.62%. United Kingdom in 2009, male had 1.8%, females had 1.9%. Or even in Spain, in 1998, the male had 1.46%, where the females had 1.4%. So 0.06% difference between those sexes, so not very much. And so looking at the prevalence of psoriasis in the US, the International Federation of Psoriasis Associations, or IFPA, reported that 3% of the world's population has some form of psoriasis. In the US alone, 150,000 new cases of psoriasis are diagnosed each year. The American Academy of Dermatology reported that psoriasis affects roughly 7.5 million people in the US. And the chart on the right is looking at the prevalence of psoriasis on a global level. And this is done through percentages. Looking more closely at the prevalence of psoriasis on a global level, according to the Global Report on Psoriasis, the prevalence of psoriasis varies between 0.09 and 11.4% in countries. In developed countries, the prevalence is usually between 1.5 and 5%. And the graph on the left is showing the world map of the rates per 100,000 people of psoriasis for all ages and both sexes. Lastly, there tends to be trends in psoriasis. The number of people diagnosed with psoriasis seems to be increasing. For example, China in 1984, the prevalence was 0.17%. Then 25 years later, the prevalence equaled 0.59%. In Spain in 1998, the prevalence equaled 1.43%. Then 15 years later, the prevalence equaled 2.31%. The same thing happened in the United States. In 2004, prevalence was 1.62%. Then in 2010, the prevalence was 3.1%. But these trends may be influenced by changes in definition and diagnoses. Then finally, here is my literature cited. These are the sources that I use to find my information on psoriasis. Thank you for listening and learning more about psoriasis.